Welcome to Kill the Cat. This is a bit of a special episode for us, as we're bringing our first ever guest onto the show, Emily from the Supernatural on the Rocks and Glee on the Rocks podcasts. Emily's been part of Fandoms for a long time, and so we brought her in to discuss BBC's Sherlock and the fandom it garnered. It's a bit of a longer chat discussing some of the elements that attracted the fandom, some things the creators got right, some of the mistakes they made, and hopefully some ways you can consider these things in your own work. There's a few minor spoilers for Supernatural, and obviously major spoilers for Sherlock. But otherwise, sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome to Kill the Cat. A bit of a different episode for everyone today. We're talking about Sherlock, and we have a guest.
We have our first guest on the podcast. We have Emily from On the Rocks Productions. It's got two podcasts going at the moment. You have Glee on the Rocks and Supernatural on the Rocks. So Emily, do you want to tell us a bit about your podcasts?
Hi, yes. Thank you for having me. So we do two podcasts at the moment, Glee on the Rocks and Supernatural on the Rocks. And our thing is to look back at shows that we were kind of intense fans of at the time and dissect them. We like to think in a somewhat humorous way, but also as fans of them, we tend to be very critical of things that we once loved and still love, but do have some concerns and criticisms of those things. For Glee on the Rocks, we are rewatching the entire series one episode at a time. And for Supernatural on the Rocks, we are, because there are 15 seasons, and that is quite a lot to do, my co-host and I rewatch an entire season of the show, and then each episode of the podcast covers one season. So we just take deep dives into the series, the writing, the style, the themes, and just kind of everything that we didn't get a chance to talk about at the time. We are airing our grievances, but also our loves of the show now.
Yeah, so I guess I listened to Supernatural on the Rocks first as someone who was sort of kind of in the Supernatural fandom back in the day, and then I went on to your Glee one. And I think what I really liked about your podcast is there's a lot of like film and television criticism podcasts out there, which I find very hit or miss. We tend to try and be as positive as we can on ours. But what I really liked about yours is it was coming from like a place of love.
Yeah.
And it was coming from like people who really, really knew and at one point really enjoyed the source material and saw, like many fandoms see, like how it could have been better.
Yes, that is definitely an angle that we take every time, is that we loved the shows. But because we love them, we are very critical of them, because I think with any media that you are invested in, you are always thinking, well, why didn't they do this? And why did they do this? And I think that's good. I think that's okay. I think there's sometimes a culture around media and properties that people get a little precious about the things that they like, and you can have fandoms and fans out there who don't want to critique or criticize the things that they love, and that's an approach to take. But it's not our approach. Our approach is to say, okay, well, we like this thing, but not all of it. And some of the things that the shows that we love did are garbage. Glee had storylines that now are like super offensive. Supernatural treats female characters in ways that are horrendous. So we're not going to rewatch these shows and just let that slide, because we also love the shows and maybe think about them too much and can't stop thinking about them.
Look, no.
What you're talking about.
Hard relate.
Then you start a podcast because you need to tell other people the things that you're thinking and hope that other people are also thinking those things.
I think for me, this episode is, I'm going to kind of be the, like, ignorant, I won't assume myself the protagonist, but, like, the ignorant protege apprentice who comes along to follow. I'm the Watson of this episode.
Yes,
I wasn't
Emily
in
are the
any
Sherlocks
of the,
in this particular scenario.
I wasn't part of any of these fandoms. I came, like, I've watched through Glee, but that was only, like, last year.
Oh, that's late for a show like Glee.
Yeah, whereas my wife watched it as it was coming out, so she she wanted to do a rewatch, and that's how I ended up watching it. And I came to Sherlock only a couple of years ago, so it would have been probably just after season 4 aired. And I didn't see season 4 until last year. as well. So for me, I'm like, I come to all this media without the context of fandom. And so it's really interesting hearing things from like people who are fans. There's this devotion to the media. You talk about Supernatural kind of going off the rails about halfway through, and it's like halfway through was 7 years before it finished. That's a long time to be committed to something fans are feeling is off the rails. Like Sherlock, we've all acknowledged, and we won't go too far into, maybe at the end of the episode.
Yeah, we're going to have a little bit of a vent at the end, but we will try and stay positive because, you know...
There's a lot of good things.
Like you said, that pain of being a fan. So yes, I am very heavily into some fandoms.
What?
Hello, certain readers of mine that I know are listening to this. But my massive fandom when I was about 18, 19 years old was BBC's Sherlock, which is when the first 2 seasons were out. Yeah, and what you were talking about, Emily, of like that pain of being a fan... after watching the last season, I completely switched off from the show. I haven't rewatched it until this podcast. Yeah, because I felt so hurt that the creators were so mean towards their fans and so dismissive. And it was almost like, how dare you like this thing that we created?
What a place to be in.
I know, right? Like,
someone created, how dare you like my thing, not, do you like it?
The relationship between fans and creators is so fascinating to me because it's like the writers and the creators are making a thing to be consumed. And then at some point, maybe it's the feedback loop of a particular fandom's reactions, or, you know, there's studio pressures, there's financial pressures, there's all these things. But some seem to sour, and it's like they stop enjoying the creation of the product, and then they see feedback from the fans and the viewers, and then they just start to like, oh, you like that thing? Okay, we're not going to do that. We're going to do something else so that you don't like it anymore. Like, but we were having a good thing here. What are you doing?
Like antagonizing the fans almost.
Yeah, there's sometimes seems to be an antagonistic relationship, or... oh, you liked that couple on that show? Breaking them up.
Kill one of them, bury your gays.
We're gonna kill someone. We're gonna send someone else off to a different country. We're going to take a character trait that you really liked about this character, and we're just gonna retcon it right out of them. Like, we're gonna do it because we can, because we are the creators. And maybe being on the fan side, that's our perception and not the actuality of the creator. But because you can't have those conversations with them, there's no way to know. In Supernatural, you're watching the show like, what are you doing? Are we enjoying ourselves? What did you do?
Yeah, Stephen Moffat made some unflattering comments about the fans. I think at one point, like, he got asked about, like, why do you think so many young girls like your show? And his response was, I think they find Benedict Cumberbatch attractive.
So reductive.
And there's this certain bitterness, I feel, of like, oh, we didn't attract the fan base we wanted.
Right.
And just this kind of media stereotype of like these crazy fangirls. And they're like, oh, our product must be lesser if this audience is into it.
Yes.
But I feel like that's also a failure to recognize that, like, when you look at the populations of fandoms, it tends to be younger, tends to be female, and tends to often be like LGBT.
Yes.
Like a lot of representation in that. Like, it tends to be a more diverse group. Of course, you're going to see that in your fans because those are the people who have the time and the interest to kind of get devoted into it. Like when you look at the people who are writing fan fiction, the people who are engaging in online communities, especially in like Tumblr and the places where you kind of develop fandoms. Like Tumblr was a women's medium.
Tumblr is still going strong, no matter what people try to tell you. It's still there. And it's actually one of like
that's the heart and soul.
Yeah.
And it's one of like the last few media, like social media sites that isn't obsessed with like advertising, for example, or like revenue, or like trying to like boost creators. Like we refer to ourselves as like a dumpster fire, and we're like, no, just let us have the dumpster fire. We like it that way.
This dumpster fire.
They've sold Tumblr twice for just decreasing value.
Are you serious?
It's hilarious.
That's
they can't
amazing.
do it. They keep trying to do advertised posts, and now you can monetize your blog on Tumblr now, and people are like, no.
People like rioted against that. They're like, don't you dare use is it Post Plus? Is that what it's called?
Plus. Yep.
Yeah, people are like, don't use it. It's gonna do this, and like,
And have people
Absolutely
actually largely abstained from it?
I don't know anyone who uses it.
Wow.
I don't know anyone
we're like,
either,
That's
Well, we walk a very tricky, like, legal line with
It's
fan
a very
fiction and
tricky-
stuff.
yes.
And there's also, like,
And fan art, especially.
Yes, there's, like, a big fandom taboo of, like, you do not monetize your fan fiction.
That's fair.
Like, you do not have a button that says, go buy me a coffee. You just don't do that because you could get the rest of us in trouble.
Yeah, it's an interesting world out there for fans. Actually, it's an interesting point about the fact that this fandom is, I think, I don't know about younger, but probably female, because I think the fact that it's women potentially to the creators does, as you were saying, I don't think it's what they anticipated being their fan base, which I don't know about you, we could have predicted that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
I
that's
feel like watching the
like-
show, I'm like, this,
Duh.
like, even season 1, I'm like, yeah,
obviously.
duh.
Yes.
Like,
It's-
obviously you're heading down this path.
I mean, if you tick off the boxes of like attractive British, they're solving mysteries, it's a crime drama, it's quirky.
There's really good banter.
There's
it's-
great
yeah.
banter. There's obvious chemistry between the actors. There's some fun music. It's fast paced. Like you're just ticking off fandom boxes. It's a pre-existing property that's had fans from the past. Like you've just Star Trek'd everything already. You're hitting like X-Files here with a skeptic and a believer. Like you're already, which I can say. So you'd asked before, like the X-Files was my original fandom.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah, that was my first love as a kid. Probably too young to have watched the X-Files. That was one of the first things I watched.
All I know of the X-Files is that I snuck downstairs when I was like 3 or 4 and watched an episode of the X-Files because my mum used to like it, and terrified myself.
Yeah.
And have never watched an epised since.
I did the
I
same.
remember
And I was like,
doing that,
perfect.
but I know that I did that.
I did the same, but then I was hooked.
Ah,
Well, that's a good segue into our like first point of what we wanted to like talk to and like discuss today for like our listeners who are upcoming like filmmakers, screenwriters, is we're talking about how to like create a fandom. And one of the reasons we wanted to use BBC Sherlock, because like as we just discussed, it's not the fan base the creators were targeting, and yet they found one really quickly. And abstractly, like a BBC miniseries is such an odd choice to have such a massive fandom.
Yeah.
But once you start watching it, you're like, yeah, I can see why this picked up the fan base it did. So yeah, let's get into the elements of the show that really grabbed fandom. So yeah, like you said, the leads.
I mean, they're charming as all get out, especially in this, you know. So the pilot is not the original pilot, but it is the much better pilot. So I'm glad that they went in that direction with some reshoots and re-editing.
did they ever release the original pilot?
No, I think I had like a torrented version downloaded to my laptop. It's
You can watch it on one of the box sets.
Is it still Freeman and Cumberbatch?
yes. I don't think Mycroft is in the original pilot though, right?
I think less of if he's even in it. It's less fast-paced. You don't... it's missing a lot of like the frenetic, kinetic kind of energy.
Yeah, and Sherlock
So I'm
gets
glad they-
drugged by the taxi driver and like kidnapped in his own apartment, as opposed to willingly walking into the taxi cab.
Which is the much more interesting,
Yes,
much more
definitely.
Sherlock option, right?
But yeah, so the elements that are there, I think, are the actors kind of clicking very quickly as a duo, because they are very much a partnership, even though the characters are still working out their relationship of, is this going to work? I mean, obviously, if you know anything about Sherlock Holmes, you know that Sherlock and Watson are going to get along.
Well, yeah.
But I think as a viewer, you're like, ooh, how's it going to play out? Are they going to hate each other? How long is it going to take? But
Yeah, we still want to
as
see how that
actors.
dynamic unfolds, right, for this variation, because, you know, every variation, the dynamic is slightly different, and different actors bring something different to it.
yeah. Do you know what's super interesting, though, that I just thought of the way when you said variation? What that is a fanfic trope. What you're watching is a version of two characters you already know, which is absolutely what you're doing when you're reading fanfic.
It's a modern AU.
Yeah.
It is a modern AU. So you already know the characters. You already are familiar with the story because it's a study in pink, a study in scarlet. You're kind of already vibing with what's happening. So you're kind of like in the groove.
And especially because we'd seen like the Robert Downey Jr.
Yes.
Sherlock
Sure.
only
I
a
loved
few
that
years
movie.
before.
And actually,
Yeah.
that was the movie that, like, okay, so why I got into BBC Sherlock is because I saw Robert Downey Jr.'s Sherlock Holmes and then just got obsessed with, like, Sherlock Holmes. So I went back, I read all the original novels. There's a great, like, Michael Caine version. There's the Disney version with the mice.
Oh, the mice.
And this came on, I'm like, oh, it's set in modern day. That's fun. And then this became my favourite Sherlock Holmes iteration for a long time. I still like the Robert Downey Jr. one, though.
I love the...
Same
Robert
thing.
Downey.
Him and
think
Jude
they're
Law,
fun.
just chemistry.
Yeah.
Yeah. it's
Amazing
great.
banter.
As an outsider looking in, I think there's something to be said for the two characters. Like, there's like an element of they're both outsiders to the world they're in, right? When you look at the fandom, that's something I think a lot of people can kind of relate to and connect with. Like, you know, Sherlock is, in his words, a high-functioning sociopath, but like he's got his thing going on. But then Watson is struggling to reconnect to the world that he's in because he's just come back from something so different, and he actually needs something different, and that's what Sherlock is able to offer him.
And everyone is misinterpreting what they need.
Yeah.
So there's that great moment where, like, Sherlock does the big rundown of, like, how he knew about John, like, at St. Bart's, and then, like, John compliments him, and Sherlock's like, oh, that's not what people usually say. What do they usually say? Piss off. Like, and then you immediately get to the crime scene, and you've got Donovan there calling him freak, and so you get the sense, like, oh, like, he's brilliant and, like, kind of an asshole in his own words, but John sees through all of that to, like, the amazing person that's there, and in return, Sherlock sees everyone's telling John to, like, get back to normal life, and Sherlock and Mycroft both see, no, you don't need a normal life, you need adventure, and you need Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
I had forgotten how outwardly mean people were to Sherlock.
So mean to him. They're, like name calling and
Right to his face. Like, no
Yeah.
wonder he's... Especially in those first episodes, I was like, there's no need to call him freak right to his face.
Yeah.
But yes, you're absolutely right that they are meeting at a place that they both need what the other has, or they're both missing what the other has at this moment. Plus rent in
plus
London.
rent.
Yeah, you know, the
look,
real-
they want to live in London, you know.
Yeah.
It's expensive.
Yes, there's that. I did love walking into that apartment for the first time with just the mess absolutely everywhere, contrasting with Watson's just...
It
it
was
was
a
so
bit
sad.
jarring seeing that, because I always forget that it starts on Watson. But, like, you see there's a shot of his apartment, and it's, like, his bed, and there's just emptiness.
And they
it
always
looked like he was
position
living in a
John
hostel.
like on one side of the frame early on. There's always like empty space next to him because you
Yeah.
need Sherlock to come and fill it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they
Like, even
want
just
the
talking
creators
about
And
Like,
they
want
don't
oh,
know
these
how they
two.
got the fandom.
Well, exactly. That's a correct point, though. It's like, and then they wonder why people immediately start like, are they a couple? Like, well, look how you framed them in the scene. You did this.
Stephen Moffat was working on Doctor Who for long enough before this that he should have seen this coming. With the Who fandom, like, it's just...
There's a powerful fandom.
It's very powerful. And then we had Super Wholock back in the day. I don't know if that's still around,
Yes.
but so that's our main like pairing. Fandoms will generally ship these kinds of characters. Look, as a non-shipping fan, I also thoroughly just enjoyed them as friends, but actually re-watching this, again, non-shipping fan didn't ship it, but even on this rewatch, I was like, man, like, yeah, they're in love. And just all the queer baiting that goes on. Yeah, this show is weirdly obsessed with Sherlock's sexuality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very
it
odd.
is.
Just with Irene Adler,
is.
and then again in like the weird holiday special.
Yeah, it was interesting that immediately in the pilot, they're like talking about Sherlock's sexuality. Like, is this needed in this? Or are you putting this on the viewer to now start thinking about? Because if you bring it up in every episode, you're asking us to think about it with no payoff.
Yeah.
Because it does carry through for quite some time. Like, you start thinking about it with John and Mary, you start thinking about it with Irene Adler, you start thinking about it with everything. Like, so are we gonna find something out about Sherlock's sexuality, or is it just nothing?
It's gonna leave it. And there's a line John has, and something about Irene Adler, and he's like, you should ask her out because something about a romantic attachment would complete you as a person. And I'm like,
know.
can you just let him be asexual and leave him alone?
This was always my thing, that felt so weird with the Irene Adler is that Sherlock feels so confident in everything that him being asexual and just confidently there and like just almost like sex is boring to him. Like
it doesn't interest him.
Like he's after something more interesting. The fact that Irene had any power over him because of her sexuality feels wrong for Sherlock, and I would have rather have seen her have to then use her mind as well to keep up with him. And like that's where the power dynamic now. It's like, yes, she uses her sexuality and that gets everyone else and it doesn't get Sherlock. So she becomes a better character because she can actually keep up with Sherlock without that. Yes. And then suddenly Irene's really interesting, agree. Right?
Yeah, look, props to Lara Pulver for pulling that character together and making her watchable. But there's even that line where like Irene's like, I'm gay, but Sherlock. Like, to John.
Right.
And she's like, look at us both. And I'm like, how is the fandom not supposed to interpret that as maybe John is straight but gay for Sherlock, if Irene's gay but straight for Sherlock?
You can't be a writer and a creator and put that into the final draft of the script and not have it be on purpose. And these creators leave so many other context clues and nuggets for future episodes that either they're all on purpose or they're not. So then do you take them seriously for the rest of them and believe them when they say, oh no, we set up Moriarty in episode 1 for Reichenbach? When do we believe you as a creator?
Well, they also tried to claim that they'd set up the sister, like they had planned her the whole time.
Yes.
And I'm like,
I don't think so.
Yeah. And also, why are you claiming such a bad ending?
Yeah.
You planned it this bad from the beginning.
Yeah. Is there anyone who liked Sherlock's secret evil sister?
I would love to hear if someone did.
Yeah,
we're going off track.
Yes,
this
sorry.
is for later.
But that's fine. That's also fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about like key dynamics in the core of your show. I think having two characters that are missing something that the other can bring is a great place to start if you're going to have like dual protagonists. Let's talk about side characters.
Yeah, I think actually I was going to say this about John as well.
Yeah.
One of the things they do with side characters is, especially with like Molly, is give us a place to be in the show. Like, who are we in the show? So there's a lot of people who are going to be like, oh, we're like Molly. We're like the, you know, trying to get in there. We're really excited about Sherlock.
Yeah.
I think there's an element to which we are Watson as well,
yes.
You know, trying to keep up with the deductions.
We come in it through his eyes, and even all like the side characters are Sherlock's, like not friends, but like people in the beginning. So we're meeting people like Greg and Mrs. Hudson and Molly through Sherlock, but we use the term ignorant protagonist to describe that.
Sure.
So like John is the person who's like new to that, so we get to meet all of them through John.
It's also a great way to set up Sherlock. Like there's a thing of like there's two ways to set up something about a character. You either see the character do it themselves or you hear another character tell someone about that. And hearing another character say something about a character is something that sticks with audiences a lot more. Like it gives credibility to that personality trait. And so introducing Sherlock through all the side characters is a really good way to make us connect with Sherlock and learn about Sherlock and know who he is.
And even learning about John, like we learn mostly through John through Sherlock's deductions of him. That's how we get John's backstory.
That's true,
which is a very cool way. But I remember in the fandom, like we loved the side characters too.
Yeah.
Like we like Greg and Molly and Mrs. Hudson and Maestro.
The episode where the like scene where Miss Hudson gets like tied up and then Sherlock throws a guy out the window.
Yes.
Like one of my favorite scenes. I love it.
I like that Mrs. Hudson always shipped them. I know that was part of the queer baiting, but in the fandom, but like within the story, it was cute that she low-key shipped them.
It is nice to have a character who, even when everyone else kind of dislikes the main character, has that soft spot for the main character from the beginning. Because it does humanize Sherlock without making him soft. Mrs. Hudson isn't making excuses for Sherlock. She just likes him. She has a reason to. He helped kill her husband. He did have it coming.
Yeah.
Definitely had it coming.
I love Miss Hudson's like just like wild backstory that we only ever get like snippets of.
Exotic
like,
dancer, wife of a drug lord down in Florida, I think.
Well, that is what happens when you've lived in Florida.
That's true.
Yeah.
So, you know.
And even you have like Greg Lestrade is there to be like the one person on the police force who's kind of on Sherlock's side. This is a mistake I see in a lot of scripts. If you have a character like this, everyone hates them.
Right,
and I'm like, no, you need like certain people to dislike them. And you can have people like Greg who does get exasperated and fed up, but does have a soft spot for him.
Yeah, and knows him and can like acknowledge that like he needs him. I had forgotten about in the first episode. There's the line that Lestrade says, because Sherlock Holmes is a great man, and one day maybe he'll even be a good man.
And then at the end, he's like, "Oh, he's a good man." In the last episode,
I don't feel like that got paid off well, and that's so sad because that's such a great thematic motif to set up for a character to carry through a series, right? It's like the series is he's brilliant and he's going to learn to be good
through John.
Through John, right? Like that's the thing he needs.
Yeah, and it is the juxtaposition to the other. Was it the other detective who said that if he's too bored with these murders, he will start committing
one day
them
he's going to be the one creating
He's going to be
them.
the one doing it. It's just these two perspectives of Sherlock. Okay, he's kind of a pain in the ass, but he's brilliant in his own ways. He just needs needs a little push into being a person versus he may also kill people at some point.
I love when Sherlock says something and then everyone just kind of looks at him and he's like, is that not good? And Watson's just like, a little bit not good.
Just going back to like what kind of friends Sherlock has as well. I made a note this time that he's friends with people, like he's friends with a small-time restaurant owner. He has the homeless network. I guess the kind of people that maybe like air quotes normal people don't bother with. Sherlock also sees their potential and is friends with those people. Or there's like the street artist in episode 2. The detective inspector in that episode is really rude to him. Like the banker that he goes to see that gives him the case is really rude to him. Going back to the blind banker, I realised it was Gemma Chan who plays like the lady with the teapots, who's the lead in The Eternals.
Yes.
So I'm like, it's 3 MCU actors all in the same scene. So that was pretty fun.
We haven't seen... what's the actor who plays Moriarty's name?
Andrew Scott.
I
always get confused with Adam Scott, but he's amazing.
Yeah,
he's so good.
He's such a good Moriarty.
Why haven't we seen Andrew Scott in the MCU yet? I want him back.
I would love to pop him in the MCU. That'd be fun.
Hot priest.
Yeah,
Hot priest. Yes,
he's such a charismatic villain. I like watching back through. I'm like, no, I love Moriarty. He gets so ruined in season 4.
Definitely.
But when he's around, he's dramatic. Like he is over dramatic, and it's brilliant.
You really believe that he's going to do anything?
Yeah, he is just chaotic, and you believe
pure
he can.
Chaos.
Yeah.
And it's fun that Sherlock is somewhat. When I say attracted to it, I don't necessarily mean like, romantic attachments, even though I know there was a shift in the fandom too. But there's something, like we see that in the first episode where he could just walk away from the 2 pills. But he chooses to play. And I loved the theme of the show of like, what would you do to stop being bored? Because what Sherlock and Moriarty are constantly doing, and that's also what kind of pulls John into Sherlock's world. And that's what pulls us into the show. Like we like seeing, I always called it like Sherlock vision, when we go into like the deductions and we're seeing what he sees.
You see the like little text of like what he's seeing.
Yes, the show was beautiful. Like I know it went over the top in the later seasons, but
I mean, it's such an interesting way to do the cinematography and to show the deductions and the thinking, because otherwise you're just kind of watching someone pondering.
Yeah.
And you could see in the second episode, the blind banker, I thought there was a little stumble in the cinematography where it didn't move quite as fast. And maybe it's because it was much more of a straight mystery to solve. It didn't have kind of the same deductions being done. He kind of solved parts of it pretty quickly, or at least we did. And you're kind of waiting for him to catch up to like, it's a code. Like, come on.
True.
Yeah.
But then the other seasons up until the 4th, you get all these little things in the air, and it gives the audience the immersion into what could otherwise be a little dull. And I think that's a very hard trick to pull off. It's like watching text messages on a screen. You're like, all right.
Well, even Sherlock does text messages really well.
It's
like
just,
they feel
elegant.
so natural. Yeah, elegant's a really good word for how... one of my favorite sequences in Sherlock is the chase from episode 1.
Oh, yeah.
Where they chase down the taxi.
Amazing music for that scene as
like,
well.
The music is brilliant. The use of like the road signs and the traffic... like the walk sign when like Watson goes to jump and pauses and then has to keep going.
Yep.
The GPS of like everything about that sequence is just phenomenal.
It would almost look new too, because it feels like you and I, we could we could film a chase scene at this point. I think you watch enough action movies, it feels like car's gonna go here, it's gonna go down some stairs, it's gonna cut this way. You're like, all right, I'm
watching. We're gonna cut 14 times in 3 seconds.
Yes. Yep. You're kind of for a while, like, you're not gonna know where the car is. Yeah, someone's gonna jump a fence. It's gonna go over here. It's gonna. Yeah. But in this one, because you're cutting between, they're walking, he's running, and
it's deductions happening at the same time as navigating the actual thing, and then adjusting to obstacles.
Which is and showing off Sherlock's mind. And I think a thing in definitely season 4 and also in season 3 though, is the deductions just kind of go out the window, with the exception of the wedding episode.
Right.
Like that first episode of season 3, he figures it out like, oh, there's a carriage missing from the train, and that takes him hours.
Sure.
I'm like, that's Sherlock Holmes. You should be able to see that in seconds.
Yeah.
It's the 5th of November. Oh, there's going to be an attack on Parliament. That's the only deduction that goes into that mystery.
Yeah. Like, oh, it's Guy Fawkes Day. Yeah, we know.
Yes, they put John in a bonfire because there's that thing of like going back to like what makes a fandom is I did really love that in the climax of like season 1 is it's Sherlock versus Moriarty, and we're like, we're the same people except for there's someone here that Sherlock cares about, and it's John's life on the line, which we like as fandom. That's fun. And then we liked it again in season 2. I'm generalizing, but this was my general like thing of like, he wanted to save like John and Mrs. Hudson and Lestrade, and then they kept doing that.
Yes.
And it got real old very fast.
And the first series finale, it did prove to the audience that Sherlock had progressed. I mean, it's with only 3 episodes, it's a very short timeline in a way, like, but it did prove that since he had met Watson, that he had grown to care about at least a person. Yeah. That he could, in the first episode, he was just leaving Watson behind at crime scenes. And by the finale, there's like real care and concern for his safety and well-being, which is a big change for him, and that will carry on throughout the rest of the show. So that's a great character moment and beat for him. Then yes, it does just like a little more and a little more and a little more, like, okay, but what is Sherlock gonna sacrifice at some point here? Like, what's the next character growth for him beyond caring for Watson? Like, we know that he does that.
That's so true, because I was wondering a little bit when we got to that exact same trope in the later seasons. Like, I'm like, why don't I enjoy this the way I did in seasons 1 and 2? And it's just like you said, because him caring about John in the first one is such a massive character step, and then we get further, it's like, I'm going to kill everyone. This now extends to like 3 people. Yeah. And then you get to season 3 and 4, like you said, when he's running to pull John out of the fire, or the stuff with Magnuson, or the well. John is such a damsel in distress.
It really
you're right.
is.
It doesn't change anything about Sherlock's character at that point.
We know.
I feel like season 3, another option would have been to flip it and have Watson have to save Sherlock, because he was, felt betrayed. He was pissed.
Fair
enough. Like, that being the change would have been so much more interesting. Like, Watson had to make a deduction to save Sherlock.
That would have been amazing.
It's like, how much did he learn from Sherlock in all of this? Can he do it?
I would have loved that.
His confidence, his reasoning. I mean, not that John wasn't intelligent. It's just a very different
But when you
set
put him
of
next to
skills.
Sherlock, it's...
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, John is meant to be us, essentially.
Yeah.
And, like, that's who he was always meant to be in the earliest stories. And one of the points of, like, putting all the text on screen and giving us what Sherlock sees. So the mark of good, like, detective fiction is the audience also has to have all the clues. Like, it has to be fair game that we could also figure it out. So when he's running down the deductions of the lady in pink, we've seen all of that.
Yeah.
We haven't pieced it together. And John should also get all the pieces that Sherlock gets.
I noticed that watching through this time, I'm like, there's times where Sherlock's egging John on to, like, make the deduction.
Yeah.
And it's stuff that we've had all the clues for, and we could actually figure it out. Like, I was sitting there like, oh no, I've pieced that together. Come on, John. There he is. So it gives us a genuine shot at solving things, and we get to be a bit quicker than John, which is fun for us.
I did like when John goes to there's like a brother's house with a cat with the detergent on.
The disinfectant on the feet. Yeah.
And he's like, oh, he put it on the claws of a cat, and Charlotte's like, lovely theory, but no.
No. I actually really love those scenes because it does feel like Sherlock believing in Watson's ability to do it, not mocking him or like making fun of him, but being like, come on, like that
You're so close.
ability
I
is
know you can
in
do
there.
it. Yeah.
Like just unlock his own little mind palace and just get in there and you could do this with me.
I remember when the Mind Palace was cool and not a drug trip.
Yes. Yes. Oh, the drug thing is a bummer.
I mean, it could have...
Yeah.
I think there's ways to do the drug thing well. I mean, it
There
is,
is.
coming back from the original stories, like...
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure there's like, look, I was never really into like a lot of Sherlock fic, but I imagine a lot of it would deal with that. I don't know if you were like into the fic.
I didn't read a ton of the fic. I can be a little picky, and
That's fair.
Sorting through can be difficult.
I found a lot of it was just like Sherlock and John in a happy relationship, which I get why there is an audience for that. That's just not what I'm interested
There was
in
only
reading.
one bed.
Yes.
It's snowing. There's only one bed. The power's out, and there's a fireplace.
Yeah.
Sold.
Oh
Yeah.
no, what will they do? In my notes, thinking back to the fandom, I was like, yeah, no one shipped Sherlock and Irene Adler. Irene Adler and Molly Hooper became a bit of a
Was
ship.
there a ship for
There
that?
was a ship for that. Also, okay, I never understood this, but it was so popular. But it was Greg Lestrade and Mycroft. I don't know if you remember that, Emily.
I do. And I imagine it had to do with like a sarcasm meter, maybe, or like.
Or had all the
power
other characters
dynamics?
just been taken,
I
and
think
they
it
just needed to
started-
ship the last two that
It started off with, okay, you know in the pilot how like
be.
Mycroft pulls John aside in like the creepy parking lot and gives the
Yeah.
big... Okay, so I think it started with someone suggested like, do you think he did that to Greg when Greg started like bringing Sherlock onto cases?
Just going to everybody.
Yeah.
So the fandom decided that he did, and I think that was the beginning of this
Greg
ship between
kinda
two
liked it.
characters who don't interact at all.
Yeah.
But that's another thing
A
fandoms
rare
do. We
pair.
like creating worlds, and I think Sherlock gave us just enough on like
Yes.
hints towards these people's like lives, and the fandom would take that and like build that out.
Well, I think one thing that a lot of other shows would do, especially when you get more ensemble casts, look at something like Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Very different detective show, but a great
Such
show.
a good show.
But like one episode, they'll pair Rosa with Terry, and Amy is with Charles. And the next episode, Amy's with Rosa and Terry's with Charles. And like there's all these
Right.
alternate character dynamics that work. Whereas Sherlock doesn't really do that. And it's kind of Sherlock with everyone and Watson with everyone. And then we also get the dynamic of the two of them together with everyone. But we don't get to see, like Lestrade and Molly interact. We don't see Lestrade
Right,
and
except,
Mycroft
and, like,
or
group
Mycroft and
scenes.
Molly. Yeah, it's like occasionally in a big group scene where it's really more about the interactions of everyone and Sherlock. But that's just priming for fan fiction, right?
That's
because
very
you
true.
want to see...
What's the missing scene?
Yeah, like what connections haven't we seen together? We haven't seen these two characters interact. Let's put them together.
And when they usually interact, it's nearly always about Sherlock.
Yeah.
Which, isn't awful in a mini-series about Sherlock. But generally when, like, John and
Sure.
Mrs. Hudson interact, it's generally either about Sherlock or John missing Sherlock.
Yeah.
I do feel like
Or the kitchen being destroyed,
Oh, yes, that's right.
which is because of Sherlock. So again, it
Yeah.
circles
Yes.
back.
The show was set up as this thing about the mysteries and about the deductions and how clever he is and how is he going to stay clever but become a more human person. And it kind of just became a bit more of a character drama, whereas it's like you can do that
Yeah.
character drama stuff in the fan fiction. And I think that's why in the first two seasons, it developed such a fandom because people wanted to see that, and so they wrote it for themselves, and then people
Yep.
looked for it and found it in fan fiction and in the fandom.
Yes, and we wanted to feel like they were still putting effort into the show we signed up for, which is like you were talking about when Ryan Murphy just goes off and does other shows. You're like, but you're doing this one that we like.
Yeah, because taking like, Glee for an example, when it becomes obvious that the main creators have ditched your show, it becomes hard to stay invested. And then you start approaching the show differently as a fan. You start putting different feelings onto the episodes even as you're watching them. Like one of our taglines on Glee on the Rocks is like, we didn't watch season 6 either because we didn't. I clocked out. I was like, Nope. I watched one episode because I had a screener from the studio. And I was like, well, I will watch one episode because there's a wedding of 2 characters that I like. That's all I'm going to watch.
Like, I watched season 6 because I used to have a thing where I had to finish shows. I've since grown out of that, but it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to watch it for the first time for the podcast.
That'll
And
be
that's going to
exciting.
be super interesting. I mean, older now, so we can look back on it maybe with a little less aggravation.
It's not
so there's
great.
been some time. Yeah, well.
Because we watched through
Yeah.
season 6 as well
Yeah.
when we watched
nice.
last year. And
Yeah.
it was... Season 5, you feel the difference. And season
Right.
6 is like, this just didn't need to exist.
Right. And part of it is that the original creators are just gone, and you're seeing on Twitter and Deadline and Hollywood Reporter, like, here are the 6 other shows that they're working on. Like, but I would like you to finish the show that I signed up for.
Yeah. And if you know
I
you're going to
don't
go
know-
off, just
yeah.
call it and end it. Like,
Yeah, just call it.
I think this is one of the things I appreciate. Like, Netflix seems to have this thing about not going over 4 seasons. Like, all their original shows, like, they basically never get more than 4. And so shows are starting to just end at 4 seasons. Like, The Good Place.
Yep.
Just, like, they called it. They got to 4 seasons,
a good
and they
show.
were just like, no, we're going to end it. We're going to end it well. And that's more important than,
Yeah.
continuing. And everyone gets to feel good about that, right? Fans
Yeah.
feel good. Creators feel good because they're moving on.
And I like the point you're always making in your podcast, Emily, about like the worse the show gets, the better the fanfic gets.
Oh, absolutely. Because you're making up for what wrongs they've done to you on the show. You're like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna go fix that shit over here
Yeah.
on
It's just
fanfic.
Thanos, fine, I'll do it myself.
I told someone the other day that the show is the stage and the show, but fandom is the after party.
That's very true.
Like the show does whatever it wants, but fandom is the after party where you're having all the fun.
Yeah.
And I think, Netflix calling it quits after 4 seasons does provide the writers the opportunity to say, okay, we have this many hours of television to tell a complete story. And you're not stuck in this supernatural problem of, oh, we're still going? Okay, so now we have to come up with a bigger problem. We have to come up with an even bigger problem.
Which, what do you do after they save the world, right? Like,
You meet God and God's evil sister.
Yes.
Evil
Right.
sisters. What is it with evil sisters?
Yeah. See, like in the very beginning, before we started recording, we talked about what is Supernatural. It was supposed to be a gritty, dark show about, it was the X-Files meets Route 66.
yeah.
As a dark, gritty, realistic show of 2 brothers crisscrossing the country fighting supernatural forces. The things that they fight in the first season are vampires, wendigos, and ghosts. Those are their biggest problems.
Yeah.
It takes until the 4th season for them to meet angels. But then they meet archangels and gods and everything else. There's an apocalypse, and then there's another apocalypse, and then they become the vessels. The stakes become ridiculous. The
Yeah.
creators had said that they originally thought 4 or 5 seasons, and that was going to be it. And you think, yeah, given what the first 4 seasons are like, you're like, no, that makes sense. You do these things, you meet God, like a Judeo-Christian God.
Yeah.
And then either the world ends or you save it. One or the other. You do it once, and either you all die or you live a life.
Yeah.
You don't get to keep saving the world.
And
Yeah.
dying and coming back.
Well,
and
it's a thing that I think Marvel's going to have to deal with soon with the MCU.
Yes.
Is they've saved the universe. Half
Right.
of it got snapped. They brought them back.
Yeah,
They did time
they've
travel
died
to
already.
do that. It's they're going into multiverse now, which I'm like, okay, that's the next step. There's
They've already
only so
lost me.
far you can do with that because
they're
it's not a multiverse.
I think what I like about the MCU though is because it's not just one thing. It's different
There's
things.
so many multiple
You
properties.
can go off and spend some time with Hawkeye and the Tracksuit Mafia. At the same time, Peter Parker's off with Doctor Strange and there's multiverse stuff, and then Loki's doing more multiverse stuff.
Yeah.
But then you can come back to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which is grounded post blip stuff. So you can kind of jump all over the place in terms of level of stakes.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to be world ending.
Because it felt to tie it to Sherlock.
Yeah.
The first season, you have mysteries, you solve mysteries, and then at the end of the first season, you've potentially met a mysterious M. So you've met, like, you have your first big bad.
Yeah.
For the second series, and like now you have to fight your big bad. What do you do after you've met and fought your big bad? How do you continue to fight a big bad and defeat them? Well, then you meet a super evil sister you didn't know you had?
Yeah, even like Magnuson, they tried to make Charles Augustus Magnuson the next one. And I was like, it didn't work because Sherlock wasn't deducing.
I just am curious as to, I mean, I don't think there's going to be another Sherlock.
They talk about it sometimes. Okay, here's a question. Do we want season 5?
Well, that's another, I mean, that's a, like, does it erase season 4? If you do you just say
can season 5 be a redo of season 4?
Sure.
Like they wake up, season 4 was all a weird dream.
Drug trip, maybe.
It was, and then season 5
that.
just
it was
picks
his mind
up.
palace.
Or season 4 was a crazy like fan theory about like the whole thing. And
it's just Anderson's
it's
like
Anderson,
fanfic.
Yeah. He's written a novel.
It's his board with all his...
I guess my last like little thing I would want to vent about is how they treated fans within the show itself, which Supernatural also does. Like Supernatural
So can I ask, as a non-fandom fan of the show, they clearly started acknowledging the fandom around season 3. How was that for you guys? Like, because it feels like they were kind of mocking fans a little bit in this show. There was like, and other shows have acknowledged fans before, like Avatar, which is the last episode we did. For you guys, like, what was it like watching the fandom be acknowledged? Like, was there just more excitement because it was acknowledged, or did it sting at the time?
I mean, so as a viewer, I hate it. As an active fan, I hate it. As someone who would like to write things, I also hate it.
I'm getting the sense you might hate it.
Me, an empath.
The theme here is
she hates it.
the theme here is I hate it. As you can see, we at On the Rocks don't tend to hold back when we don't like things. As a creative way to approach the show, I think breaking the fourth wall is rarely a good idea. I think the barrier between the creative property and the fans is there for a reason. I think it's the same barrier between fans and the actors on Twitter that should be maintained. I think it's why conventions are important, to give space to have conversations, to have panels, to like give fans that moment of connection and conversation, which is what Supernatural does. The show's been off the air for 2 years and they still have conventions every like 4 a year.
Yeah, well.
To give fans the opportunity to pay lots of money to go meet and greet and talk to the actors that they've been following. But for the creators and the writers, there's often a disconnect between the creative experience and the fandom experience, and the back and forth dialogue where maybe they think they're being kind of cute and cheeky, and it comes across as dismissive and rude. Or they're just being rude, and they know it.
Yeah.
In those early seasons, Supernatural introduces a book series in universe called Supernatural.
And it's about them, right? Like,
it's about them. It's being written by someone introduced as a prophet of the Lord, Chuck,
wild,
who is receiving the word of God and is just writing the story of Sam and Dean Winchester as it happens. But he is also publishing these books to the public. In the world of Supernatural, there are fans of the books Supernatural. And then in a later episode, they have a fan convention. So then there are people cosplaying as Sam and Dean.
Oh wow, that's really going deep
it's
into.
Just,
and
it
then
goes
there's a
so
musical.
hard. There's a musical episode where people put on a musical about the in-universe Sam and Dean and Cass.
Oh, there's
Wow.
also
Meta
the episode where like they go
hurts.
to the alternate universe where they're themselves in a TV show.
Yes. Yep. They go to an alternate universe where they're playing themselves in the show.
Like they're two
And
people called
but
Jensen
wild.
and Jared, and they meet like Misha
Yeah.
Collins, and they're on the set of
Yeah.
Supernatural.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, follow-up question.
So Sherlock fans kind of got off easy, I would say.
Yeah. It's a lot, and honestly, in the writing, it's not all it's not like positive. Like, aren't our fans the greatest? Because there's a character named Becky.
Oh,
who's
wow,
a crazy who's acted as an insane fan who writes fan fiction, who writes incest fan fiction between Sam and Dean, who are brothers.
Isn't it Wincest?
Wincest.
Yeah. Wincest, yes. Good job. See, she's definitely not a positive representation of the fandom. There are a lot of comments in these episodes that are negative towards fandom, I think. I mean, my interpretation of them are very, like, kind of pointed and a little spitey and a little, like, aren't our fans crazy?
Yeah, it's sad that, like, the fans who really, like, especially the ones who are creating a lot of the alternate media, like in terms of fan fiction and that kind of thing, are the ones who are portrayed as crazy, right? Because fan fiction is actually just a lot of fun. And yes,
it's amazing.
The average person isn't engaging with it and is never going to engage with it. But there's a lot of people who do and who really love it, and they're the ones who are sticking with your show. Supernatural went for, 15 seasons? 14 seasons?
15 seasons.
15 seasons. And you've said, like, it kind of was starting to go downhill around 4, really derailed around midpoint. Why, as a fan, why'd you stick around for 15 seasons?
Excellent question. I like some of the actors quite a lot. I think some of the relationships in the show are good. I think once you like a show enough, you like a show enough to keep going. I think sometimes you hope it will get better.
Yeah.
You know, I watched all of ER. That didn't stay great. Like, that wasn't amazing all the way through. I did quit Grey's Anatomy, which I am proud of myself for doing. But yeah, I think, you know, part of it is I do ship the ship. I read the fic. I'm on Tumblr, so I get the fan experience. I get the gifs. I get the fan art. I get to enjoy the positive sides.
So it's almost less about the show at a certain point and more about the community, right? Like, you're engaged
definitely.
with so much else beyond the show, that what the show does is really sort of minuscule compared to, like, the fictions you get to read and the memes you get to look at. And
sometimes there will be some really good episodes where you get to really enjoy the story that you liked the first time. Because
there's already been that, like, you've built so much, you've put that time and effort into, like, learning it, and, you know, the community. Like, with Sherlock, you know, you had 2 years between seasons, and so you spend so long.
Much hype between season 2 and season 3.
So much hype, so much fan fiction and media to engage with, that it just kind of sucks you in, and you stay around even after a disappointing end.
Yeah, and I think the changing media landscape has made the way we interact with different types of shows change. You know, I'm trying to imagine if there had been a 2-year gap between seasons of Friends. Like, who would go back to Friends if you had to wait 2 years between it?
Sherlock was an interesting one, because I actually still don't know any other show that I think could pull it off. Like, even these days, like,
I think maybe
Game of Thrones was the closest, I think. Yeah. They had some long gaps.
And we understand that, we were understanding that the production, why the production was taking so long as well. It was never like, oh my gosh, it's taking them 2 years. Like, we understand that the actors and, like, the showrunners as well are busy.
Yeah.
And it's movie-length episodes.
And it's 3 movie-length. And that almost made it feel more special, because it almost felt like the thing they will return to when they can.
Yeah.
And they actually said they put in that first, like, big fan montage of, like, Sherlock going through the window and kissing Molly was because, like, we don't feel like we can live up to all the crazy, like, theories about how Sherlock faked his death. So we'll put one wild one in the beginning.
Yeah.
Which I didn't hate the idea of. But yeah, like you said, it felt really mocking, especially, like, Sherlock and Moriarty, like, almost kissing, and then they cut away. And it's, and, like, even this time, Anderson going a bit crazy at the end, and, like, just I was
his
like,
board of red strings.
That's how you see the fandom,
which is fascinating, because, like, deductive reasoning and tying crazy ideas together is what
the show's about.
Sherlock is doing. It's like, it's what the show's about. So why is it so weird if the fans do it?
Here's the thing. Do you think if it was like a male fan base, like a predominantly male fan base doing like YouTube analysis, they would have been thrilled?
Oh, no, I think they'd be thrilled.
Yeah.
I think they'd
Yeah.
appear on the YouTube channels with them and
Yeah.
like deep dive into those theories.
Yeah. And
100%.
weird, like, and those Film Bro podcasts.
Yeah.
and,
Not a big fan. Or just the YouTube people who just yell at you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They're the ones I mean.
Yeah.
And we said earlier, as soon as a fandom is female, then people are like, get out. You're not, which happens with bands. It happens with movies. There was actually a really interesting podcast out about Twilight and the Twilight phenomenon.
Oh, interesting.
And they kind of deep dive into, the beginnings of the movie. MTV bought the script originally, and the first draft had like jet skis, and it was nothing at all like the books. And it wasn't until, I know, exactly. And it wasn't until New Line picked it up and just realized they needed to write the movie for the fans of the book.
Yeah.
That they hit on what was going to make it popular, and that was female fans. Like, New Line figured out that their fan base was female.
Yeah.
What they loved in the book is what they wanted to see on screen, and that's what was going to make the movie, not break the movie. Where what MTV was trying to do was, frankly, masculinize the movie.
Interesting. That would not have worked.
And like you said much earlier, was to get a certain fan base. Like, they were trying to get men to watch the movie. Because vampires, like, that's not what this is about. It's not what Twilight's about.
Yeah. Vampires seem like a female audience medium.
I feel like they always have been, right? Like,
Yeah,
all
I
the way
struggle
back in
to-
like Dracula days.
Yeah. Like,
It's gothic romanticism.
yeah. Like,
MTV is not that great. They're
Fair.
not that.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, like you'd said earlier about creating a fandom, they figured out that what they needed to do was stick to the book that they had and the readers that they had and not shy away from the fact that they are girls.
Yeah. I think one of the points that came up in our discussions about Sherlock with that, though, is that, like, if you start catering to what you think the fans want, though, you also start to lose things. And I think we mentioned this earlier, but, like, there is definitely an element of, like, the fans loved the twists and the fans loved the, the relationship between Sherlock and Watson. And so the show just kind of became all about that. And, like, the creators have blamed fans for the, horrible ending, which I'm like, you can't then also try to claim that you knew about the sister the whole time from season one in the same breath. Like, either you think the fans did it or you did it from season one. Like,
or you did it.
Yeah. It's not both. Fandom is there to meet a need for the fans that the show actually shouldn't be trying to meet and shouldn't. It will fail if it tries to meet. Yeah.
Yes, we want the good show you gave us for 2 seasons. Like, that's what we liked, and we wanted 2 more seasons of that. And you can leave, like, the super deep character focus dives to us.
To the people who want to do it, right?
Yes.
To the people who are... Because not everyone wants that. A lot of people just want a great mystery show, and then they're not going to engage with fandom. They're just going to go about their day having loved the show. The fandom will then create their own extra media for that.
And if you make a good enough show, the fans will find what is in that show that they love. You don't have to fill the soup with everything.
Yeah.
We'll pull out what we want from it. You don't have, like, put in what you were going to put in the first place. Don't fill the pot with everything, because then there's a crazy sister that absolutely nobody wants.
Yes.
Like,
There is a way to do that. We won't dive into that because we might have an episode coming up all about fan service, just to tease that.
that'll be interesting.
Do we have to do it now?
That'll be fun to listen to.
Do we have to do it now?
No.
This is one of the arts that you need to learn if you're going to develop a fandom, and that's called restraint.
Yes. That was my biggest... So we do, like, takeaways at the end of our episodes. That was my biggest takeaway, was restraint. Yeah, I think you see this a lot of fans... Not even just fandom, but like Pirates of the Caribbean would be like another one for me.
Oh,
people
God,
like
yes.
We love Jack Sparrow, but he wasn't written that way. Johnny Depp kind of came in and made him like this rock star pirate So then they wrote him that way for the rest of the franchise, and it doesn't really work anymore.
I mean, it kind of works for the
Right.
first few movies. Where it really dipped off is like Jack Sparrow isn't the main character of the series. Like the first 3 movies, it's Will and Elizabeth.
Yes.
They're the main characters. Jack Sparrow is a side character.
Yeah.
But the moment you make him a main character, the show falls apart because we now know
It's too
what he's up
much.
to, and it's too much. And actually, his charm was in that we never knew what he was up to, and he would just kind of pop in with like he's changed sides, you know, and yeah.
Yeah, what would your big takeaways be from BBC Sherlock? And for anyone listening who's interested in writing, not necessarily like writing for a fandom, but if you're writing something new, what can you pull from fandom as lessons?
Man, honestly, the first word that was coming to mind was respect. I think you have to respect your viewers and your readers. One, to know that they can follow the story and that they can follow what you're doing and to keep up. Because, you know, Sherlock is an incredibly clever show. And I think, especially in that 4th season, I think it was finding itself too clever. I think it really, the way Sherlock, the character, wanted to prove to everyone in the first 2 seasons how clever he was. I think the 4th season of the show really wanted to prove to the audience how good it was. To, like, it really wanted to prove how fantastic it still was, which just didn't. It like did the opposite.
And the difference in like the first 2 seasons, Sherlock is trying to get like Watson, who is our sort of stand-in in the show, to make deductions and to like engage with that process.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, you like, he gives him the time to do it, even though he
does,
has
yeah.
the answer solved.
He had the answer an hour ago. He's
Yeah.
just trying to like get you to come on the journey with
Yeah,
him.
exactly.
Because that excites him, you know?
It does. Back in the day, I worked in a lit agency in Hollywood, so I was an intern there, so I read far too many scripts, just way too many. And then I worked at a place where we did script competitions, so read even more. And then I worked at a Broadway production company, and then a film and TV production company, so read a lot. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from reading all of those is engaging scripts. They are exciting to read from the beginning. It sucks to say that those first 20 pages are absolutely the most important, and it's not necessarily that the producer and the readers are going to put it down, because they are. like the people reading your scripts at a studio or an agency are absolutely going to put your stuff down after the first 20 pages, and I'm sorry, and that sucks, but it's going to happen. It's not just the time crunch that the readers are facing, it's that if you think about watching a movie, do you want your audience to be bored in those first 20 minutes? Or do you want them as excited about what they're watching as you were when you were writing it? And I don't have a good way to say like what makes writing exciting, other than did you enjoy it when you were writing it? Because if you're slogging at your story, then it probably reads that way too. So that is not the takeaway of respect, but it is what I came around to.
No, that's really good advice. Like, I'm also a script reader, and I'm not even that generous. Like, okay, I do read the entire script because that is my job, but 10 pages.
Well, you have to, because you have to give notes.
Actually, even on the first page, I'll generally know.
It's super true, though, right? The first page, you're kind of like, all right.
And it's just like, oh, I'm in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing. And I've heard people say, that's so unfair. I spent so much time on this script. And you just know 10, 20 pages in. Also, I had a thought about, you know how like people say fanfic? So much of fanfic is so terrible. Why would anyone read fanfic? Most screenplays written are terrible.
They're terrible.
We've both been readers. We understand this.
They're terrible.
And then sometimes you get some really good ones. And that's kind of what fic is. Except fic community is so much more forgiving.
Yes.
And if you have a fic that's not very good, people will still probably read it and enjoy it, as opposed to like a mediocre screenplay which will just get tossed away.
Yeah.
Because there's so much less stakes, right? Like a screenplay, someone needs to put in, you know, a couple $100,000 to get it made, you know, if not millions. Like, whereas fanfic, you're just reading it.
You just post it for free.
It's there for fun. It's your time is the only thing,
it's
and you're
your
usually doing it in downtime. So, you know.
Another thing that I've heard people talk about the difference between scripts and fanfic is that when you're reading a fanfic, you don't have to spend, or when you're writing it, rather, you don't have to spend the time introducing your characters because you already know them. And I get saying that, but I do think it's a cop-out as a criticism, because even if your reader knows who John and Sherlock are, if you aren't still giving those characters life in your fanfic, someone's still going to close the tab because there's going to be 50,000 other ones where they are. There are ways to introduce your new OCs.
Yes.
Which, if you think about it, your screenplay characters are just OCs. You can give them life in the first 10 characters without saying, you know, intro, John, 35, brown. You know, he walks into a room with confidence, but like, you can do it without these slug lines that are boring. So if you approach your screenplay with a little levity, maybe, and with a little, I mean, that's so easy to say on a podcast, but I think if you can approach it with some, like the mind of a fic writer, where if you lower the stakes a little bit and you say, like, I know who these characters are, I'm just going to write them, especially on a first draft.
Yeah. Here's the way to approach your scripts. They're just fanfic for your OC.
I love that.
Yeah, approach every script as fanfic for your OC. Yeah.
Exactly.
That makes
total sense to me.
Stakes
gone.
It also puts things in the forefront that are important, like knowing your characters and knowing what it's about. I think good fanfics have, like, they focus on one thing, right? And they do that. Like, what's the one twist I'm putting on the usual world, or one
element
relationship
of this character that I want to deep dive into?
Yeah, or one character dynamic that I want to investigate. And that's what good movies and screenplays do. Like,
that's
they
what
have
gets
a focus.
Fandom. Like, we wanted this key relationship of John and Sherlock that got presented to us. And, like, everything else is great. Like we said, the earlier writing introductions, it looks beautiful. All that's great. Yeah. And that's my really key takeaway, and how I approach my own scripts, as I kind of approach it with, like, what is the fandom for this? What ships will they like? Although I try to make the ships that will like canon. What bits of characters can I see them fleshing out on their own? And just, approaching characters like that makes me love them more. And as naff as this sounds, imagining other people also loving your characters.
Sure, yeah.
And that makes them feel less disposable. It makes you treat them with more care.
Yeah.
So, just an attitude.
And gives them some life.
What about our non-fandom podcast today? What's your takeaway?
My big takeaway is, like, think about fans, no matter how small you expect your fandom to be, and make sure you're respecting them and just, like, treating the things they love carefully. You don't have to make your show for them. You don't have to do everything for them. They'll fill in the gaps they need filled in. Let your show be what it's meant to be. And
like you said, Emily, just respect. I think that's such a nice word. Don't have to pander to them, don't have to cater to them, but don't dismiss them either.
Yeah.
Just nice respect, because we like the thing you made, Stephen. So just let us have it.
It's a big part of the reason you keep getting to make things.
Yes.
Right? We do pay the bills.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Emily. This has been such a good chat.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
Do you want to say where our listeners can come find you and your stuff?
Oh, sure. You can find us on Instagram at Glee on the Rocks or at SPN on the Rocks. We're also on, I think, most streaming platforms for the podcasts. So I think our main platform is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So it's Glee on the Rocks and Supernatural on the Rocks. So you can come say hi. And
we will post a link in our show notes as well. If anyone listening to this, you can just scroll right down and click on them and go check it out, because they're two really good podcasts who super fans who critique the shows, well, previous super fans perhaps is more fair, who critique the shows, but with a lot of love for the original content.
I'm anticipating we're going to have a bit of crossover of people, knowing that some of the fans of our show have come across from Kat's Fanfiction.
Yes.
There's probably going to be some Supernatural and Glee lovers out there
imagine,
who will enjoy this. So. Thanks for joining us for this episode on how to create a fandom. As mentioned, you can find links to Emily's podcasts, Supernatural on the Rocks and Glee on the Rocks, as well as their social media in the show notes for this episode. Want an easy way to stay up to date with the podcast? Click follow or subscribe on whichever platform you're on. And if you have the time, leave us a review or recommend us to a friend, as it helps us to grow the show and bring you even more episodes. Upcoming episodes include Paddington 2, the Toy Story sequels, A Quiet Place, and Phineas and Ferb. You can also find us on Instagram or Facebook, so feel free to stay high. Until next time, this has been Kill the Cat.